to the Discourse Dive. I'm your host, Christina Nikitas. Thank you for being with us today. Our topic is about the prison book program, and the episode is entitled One Donated Book and Its Ripple Effect. This is a recorded broadcast, so you can message me at dive@bcattv.org. That's DIVE at bcattv.org. I'd be delighted to hear from you if you have any further questions for our guest, or if you wanted to offer suggestions for future topics or guests of interest. Feel free to email me. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone here, that's amazingly talented and kind and generous staff at BCAT, the Burlington Cable Access TV station, for all of their help and support, and truly every imaginable aspect of this production, believe me. And that includes staff, volunteers, and even BCAT alums. So I couldn't do it without you. So I want to give you a very special and heartfelt thank you. So special thanks to Jen Dodge, Sydney Bowles, Chris Flaherty, Robert Paris, Susan Linder, Varys Connolly, James Hurley, and Aaron Kerr. Again, thank you so very much. All right, so today and in the future, we'll be diving into topics that I hope you'll find of interest. My hope is that the shows will be of value to you and your family in learning something new, or gaining a new perspective, or appreciation for something, and maybe just some good old fun. So during the show, you'll find at the bottom of the screen my guest's prison book program contact information. At the end of the show, you'll find contact information for both the prison book program and the Friends of the Burlington Public Library. So please indulge me for a moment while I tell you a bit about the background of this. The vice president of the Friends was not able to be with us, so I'm trying to fill in and offer you some information here. So often moderate to large size public libraries have a separate nonprofit group called the Friends, who are in essence the fundraisers of the library. The Friends of the Burlington Public Library have helped fund library projects and enrich the programming for children and adults, and they achieve this by their semi-annual book sales and raffles. For example, for special projects, they have funded the Holds Hub, which is near the front entrance of the library, which offers 24-hour access for patrons to pick up their book orders. And also another project was a sensory cart for affected children. This is just to mention a couple of the recent large funding projects. Okay, stay with me here. The last day of the Friends book sale of the library is a Sunday, and it's the buy a bag day. $10 for a full bag of books. Such a great deal. So in October, it's where I met Lee Rubin Collins. Once I got beyond her sandals and her fabulous pedicure in the dead of October, she mentioned she's a volunteer for the prison book program. I realized I knew so little about this. So the Friends of the Library gladly invite the prison book program to visit at the end of the book sale in order to source and choose all of the books they wish. In messaging Lee, she sent a very gracious thank you note and some examples of thank you letters from prisoners that they had received. These prisoners who are so changed by reading books, instilling hope, and the ability to reimagine their lives going forward. Well, my life had changed when I read these. I was so deeply moved. It catapulted me into this show's episode in order to share it with you, to be honest. Still curious in finding out more, Lee placed me in contact with her executive director, who has graced us with her presence here today. How fortunate we are. So it's time to settle in with your coffee, your tea. We have lots to cover. I'd like to introduce to you my guest now, Dr. Kelly Brotzman. She's the executive director of the nonprofit The Prison Book Program in Quincy, Mass., the largest and remaining program in the nation. Dr. Brotzman, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Christina.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Happy to be here.
So I wanted to have us get a little bit familiar with your background. Where are you from, your schooling, or whatever you'd like to share with us.
Sure. So I grew up as an Air Force brat. I was born in the Philippines while my dad was fighting in Vietnam, and my sister was as well. So, and he turned his Air Force stint into a whole career. So we spent our lives moving around a lot of places. I went to a ton of different schools all over the country and the world, which, contrary to what some people say, it's a great way to grow up. You get exposed to so many different things, many cultures. It's a very racially integrated, most of the service is racially integrated. And and I attended, like I say, many different elementary, middle, and high schools. And so I don't really have a hometown, but since I, left home for college, I've pretty much been on an academic pathway. I was on an academic pathway from college. I went straight into a Fulbright in Heidelberg, Germany, and then I went into a PhD program. And then I had about a 20-year teaching career in higher education, higher education teaching and administration. And I also, I think it's important, given what we're going to talk about today, that, I had no experience of the criminal justice system whatsoever. Growing up, I never knew anyone who'd even been arrested or been to court or anything like that. So I was really very unaware of the way our criminal legal system functioned. And it was really, in my adult life and in my academic career when I came into contact with those things.
Okay. So let's get back to your education. So in the pantheon of disciplines, your path was ethics, PhD. Yes. How and why did that come about in your life?
Well, I'd always been, I guess I would say, obsessed with questions about morality, questions about what our responsibilities are to other people, and what communities' responsibilities are to their members. And I think that's just because I grew up in a very morally robust household. Those sorts of things were always top of mind for my parents and those who raised me. And I think I always had a sense that there were those who had unfair disadvantages, in society. And I could see it around me. I could see the inequalities in certain opportunities that would be offered, whether at school or in extracurricular activities. And I just saw, differences in the kind of paths that individuals could have, given their family of origin, given their family's income. And a lot of that struck me as kind of unfair. I have one distinct memory. My family signed up through a church or something to go visit a refugee family, and these were Laotian refugees. And we were just there to sort of help them learn how to work their stove, and they had just been placed into housing. And I remember thinking, wow, these, the kids in this family, there were 3 of them. They didn't know English. They were freshly arrived in the country with very few resources. They'd lived in a refugee camp for a couple of years before coming to the United States, and it just struck me that they should have just as many opportunities as I did. I think I must have been maybe 10 years old at the time, but how likely were they to sort of have all of the avenues for exploration and have all the possibilities that someone like myself could have. And so, I would say it was, sort of an age-appropriate awareness of the ethical problems with, a highly unequal society, the highly unequal society that we live in. And that kind of catapulted me to studying ethics in college. I was an English major, but I also took tons of philosophy and religion classes. And I realized that this is a discipline. It's not just something you sort of informally think about and wonder and, have concerns about, but it's something people study. And there are millennia worth of scholarship on these questions about what we owe to each other. So basically I was interested in the social side. So there's some ethicists focus on individual behavior, and some ethicists focus on social ethics. So how communities should look, how they should be structured, and I was definitely drawn to social ethics, and that takes you right into the study of our present world and what it's doing and what it's failing to do to secure the rights of everyone, to provide equal opportunities to everyone. And so I was always kind of focused on what I would call social problems, like concrete social problems. Educational inequality, poverty was of great interest to me. Why some people had generations of poverty in their families, and what it meant to really have opportunity. All those questions were really important to me, and so when I started teaching in higher education, I would generally teach courses about social justice and social ethics.
And the teaching wasn't in Virginia, is that right?
I started my teaching career at Boston College here in Massachusetts. I taught there for 6 years and taught courses about social justice and personal responsibility. And then I moved to Loyola University in New Orleans, where I was
another Jesuit university.
Another Jesuit university. They do like to hire from each other. And I directed the service learning program there and taught one-off courses here and there. But my primary role there was administrative. I supported professors who wanted to incorporate volunteerism into their class as an assignment, just another assignment, and built up the service learning program there. And then I returned to my alma mater, actually, which is Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, and I taught there in a poverty studies program. So I taught both Introduction to Poverty Studies and the senior research thesis class, and that's also when I started teaching college classes in prisons. So the things I was teaching about were always sort of like right next door to what I see as the massive injustices of our criminal legal system in the United States, from the whole spectrum, from policing to the courts to prisons. And I would frequently teach about poverty as a risk factor for incarceration, because it is. And so the criminal justice system is not all that, far from teaching about poverty and economic inequality. And then I came back to Massachusetts in 2017 for a role at the Institute for Social Justice at Bridgewater State University. So again, that was primarily an administrative role. That's...
And there is, in chatting with you previously, there seemed to be a kind of eureka moment in your career when you were pairing students to internship programs. That seemed to bring you a lot of fulfillment. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the program I was teaching in at Boston College in my first teaching job was the Pulse program for service learning. And the Pulse program combined a year-long academic course, which was popular because it met all of the philosophy and theology requirements at Boston College, which as a Catholic school are numerous. If you took the class the whole year, you completed all of those requirements. But you also had to do, as a student in the course, you had to do 8 to 10 hours a week of volunteer work at a Greater Boston nonprofit. It is a lot. And that's why you got sort of double credit for doing this whole course. And so the director and assistant director of the program had agreements with about 40 to 50 Boston area, Greater Boston nonprofits that students could get to on the T, or if they had a car, they could drive it. And the idea of the course was to integrate the kinds of lived experiences that the students were having at their service placements, where they were working with unhoused people, food insecure people, kids struggling in underperforming schools. A lot of the placements, we call them field placements, a lot of the placements dealt with people who are on the economic margins of life in Greater Boston. One of the placements was the Suffolk County House of Corrections. And others were with like the victim witness program through the DA's office. So there were some placements in the criminal legal system, but I had students who were serving at all of the different placements, and I would, use their experiences there as examples or as illustrations of the things we were reading and discussing in class. Mm-hmm. And their written work, most of the papers that they did, had to also integrate the kinds of things that they were observing firsthand in their field placement with the kinds of like classic texts that we were talking about in class. And so it was just a way of, I think, bringing an experiential side to college teaching and learning that was very exciting to me, because I think it's really easy to be up in front of a classroom and feel like, oh, my students aren't engaged, they're not listening. But if they're having these lived experiences, it really does heighten the engagement on both sides. Mm-hmm. So it was a watershed moment.
Okay. So at this point, you yourself began to be impacted and want to go within the prison and teach there.
Yes. So
tell us, how did that come about?
I had the sense that the prison system was one of those many social systems that I should be concerned about, the same way I was concerned about, poverty and lack of socioeconomic mobility and opportunity. But the problem with the prison system is it's almost totally invisible to the general public outside the prison system. Mm-hmm. And so it's really difficult to sort of understand what it's like. And so I knew that any contact with the criminal justice system was hugely disadvantageous in a lot of ways in people's lives. And I knew that a lot of people didn't deserve necessarily to be there, or to be there as long as they were. And I knew that sort of the system of pleas and trials that make up our criminal sort of court procedure were badly out of date, I would say. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to get a firsthand perspective. There's Brian Stevenson, who's an author I really admire. Mm-hmm. He's the director of the Equal Justice Initiative. He talks about the power of proximity. Like, if there's something you want to understand, if there's a social justice issue you want to understand, you have to go close. Mm-hmm. You have to go close, and only then will you really fully understand. You can read all the books in the world about the prison system, but you have to go there and you have to talk to the people. Mm-hmm. So I started volunteering for an organization called Partakers in Greater Boston, which at that time was supporting incarcerated students at 2 Massachusetts prisons who were enrolled in the free bachelor's program that Boston University offered at that time. They don't offer it anymore, but they offered a free bachelor's program in 2 Massachusetts prisons, and it wasn't like a regular 4-year degree. You needed like at least 10 years to sort of complete it, but it was real BU professors. And what the BU people found was that the students in the course had no problem with the material. Like, the hard material was no problem. It was the soft skills that a lot of people develop in high school, like how to study, how to take notes, those academic soft skills, how to organize a paper, that sort of thing. And so they organized these teams of volunteers through Partakers to go help the students with those academic soft skills. And so I was like, well, I have that skill set. I teach students. So I did that for about 3 years, and that was the very first time I had ever set foot inside a prison. And what I saw there infuriated me. Mm-hmm. And so it just sort of grew from there.
Okay. So what was the stipulation with the prisons, our Massachusetts prisons, as to how many hours you were allowed in to teach? And I'm sure there are other stipulations as well.
Well, there's obviously prisons are a highly controlled environment.
Right.
And so while I wasn't delivering the classes through the BU program, the classes that they would take would usually be in a designated section of what they call the school in the prison. Every prison has a little hallway, usually hallway with rooms on it, that is the school. And whether you're doing adult basic education, which is like primary school for adults, which is like basic reading and writing and numeracy, it would be in the school. If you're doing a GED, it would be in the school. But the college program usually had a special room reserved for it. And so the students still had to be counted. Usually incarcerated people are counted manually 4 times a day, four or 5 times a day. And so the classes would be organized around the count. So the professor would come in and, they would have as much time before the next movement. Prisons are organized around movement when people are moving around. So that whether they're moving from cells to the chow hall or the dining room, whether they're moving from their cells to their paid job within the prison, all movement is highly controlled and can only happen at certain times. Some of the students would get a special pass, like a special pass to move during times when other people weren't allowed to move. And sometimes they would get a special pass to participate in the college class. But it's all very highly controlled and very unlike a typical college class on a campus in the free world today. And there's a lot of adjustments that have to be made to college level teaching that take place in a prison environment.
Okay. Did you remain friends after your classes had finished? Did you remain friends with the incarcerated and communicate with them?
I have a lot of, sometimes people laugh at me for this, but I have a lot of friends in prison. And out of prison. I was, when I started teaching classes of my own, it was in a Virginia State prison, Augusta Correctional Center in Craigsville, Virginia, when I was teaching at Washington and Lee. And I had 10 men, incarcerated men, take each of the 3 classes that I offered. And it wasn't always the same 10. But there were probably 40 guys who went through one or more of those classes. And I am still close with at least 8 to 10 of them. There's 2 gentlemen that I was able to advocate for parole on their behalf. I was successful in 2 cases. There's another guy that I've advocated for him now several times and have not been successful in that case. There's several guys that I send letters to and emails to regularly. I get attached to all my students, whether they're students in the free world or whether they're students in prison.
I understand.
But they're all, the one thing they all have in common is that they're interesting and complex people. And so I always try to get to know my students, and I got to know many of the incarcerated ones very, very well, and consider them, good people and friends. Of course, they were screened into the classes. They obviously were not, if they weren't misbehaving, they'd had a disciplinary incident-free history for, I think it was at least 5 years. And so, they were sort of on the straight and narrow as far as their conduct in prison. And, so it wasn't every person in the prison who was considered for a spot in these classes. You had to have a high school diploma or a GED. And the principal in the school, the prison school, did a little timed writing exercise just to make sure that you had the writing ability.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they would select the 10
I wondered
guys.
about that.
They would select the 10 guys for me for each class.
I see.
And I just sort of respected their judgment on that.
Okay. So I know where you come down on this, but how do you respond to individuals that believe strongly that prison is only for punishment?
I would respond to those people that accountability for those who harm others or who make others unsafe is imperative. I agree that harm has to be redressed. The harm that other people do, that some people do to others, has to be redressed. The current situation in our prisons is, in my opinion, tantamount to torture rather than punishment. It's inhumane at every level. And so what happens is 95% of the people in there are going to come back to their communities. What do you want them to be like when they come back into your community?
Right.
If the prison only harms the people in its custody, they will come out traumatized, they will come out angry, they will come out bitter, and many do, because that's what our current prison system is designed to do, is to debase, to dehumanize, to strip away any kind of individuality and to purposefully destroy the web of caring connections that a person might have when they enter prison. All of that's not punishment. That's just, it's inhumane. It's torture. And our prison system accomplishes very little for the communities that these people return to in terms of net benefits to public safety, public and personal safety. When people are returned to their communities after that kind of traumatic experience.
Right. So tell us a little bit about some of the statistics in terms of recidivism, and for those who have encountered education, and for those that haven't. What are the statistics? So for Massachusetts or nationally, or either one or the other?
So there are just under 2 million people in prisons and jails in the United States today. That's come down a little bit. The peak was in 2008, but not a lot. And more than half of those do not have a high school credential, between 60 and 70%. Many people get a GED or a high school equivalency credential during a term of incarceration. We know, this is not opinion, this is settled social science. The National Academy of Sciences has agreed on this a long time ago, that the single most effective intervention you can deliver to people during a term of incarceration to reduce their odds of recidivating or returning to incarceration is to educate them. That is the number one. Someone who receives correctional education while incarcerated, it cuts your chance of recidivating by a third. Now that may not sound like a lot, but currently in the United States, between 60 and 80% of people who exit incarceration return within 60 months or 5 years. That's pretty bad. If our high schools were failing to graduate 60 to 80% of the students, the system would be burned down and we would start all over again. People would be in the streets if that was happening. It is happening in the prison system. It's failing, basically. It's failing to rehabilitate or to equip people for productive and safe lives in the community in 60 to 80% of cases. So to be able to cut that by a third is really something. And that's what all the meta-analyses show, is education is the number one thing you can do for someone. Post-secondary education, the recidivism cut is even larger. It's probably twice as large based on what we know and studies that have been done on people who have received. And that's because, think about it, post-secondary education is where you're really learning the critical thinking skills, high-level analysis skills, being able to analyze your surrounding, the world, understand the world around you in a deep sense. And that's the sort of thing that's going to help you in terms of contemplating your future actions as well, and staying away from, criminal activity and bad influences. So post-secondary education has been largely unavailable in American prisons since 1994. The 1994 crime bill made people in prison ineligible for Pell Grants, which is the federal government's primary form of tuition assistance for low-income students. The good news is, so community colleges used to have whole campuses, like in large prison complexes, because Pell Grants, they're not a lot. They top out now at about $7,000 a year. It wasn't enough to pay for like Harvard or anything, but it was enough to pay for a couple of community college classes. So you saw a mass exodus after 1994. They all just went away. And the good news is they're starting to come back. So colleges that have been offering classes in prisons have been doing so entirely at their own expense. So the college classes that I offered, they were free to the incarcerated students. Washington and Lee, the college, covered all the costs and didn't really reap any financial benefit from it. But, and BU, for example, was also doing that. They were just doing it entirely at their expense. But Pell Grants are coming back for people in prison this academic year, the 2023-2024 academic year.
Great.
So my prediction is we're going to see community colleges and the lower cost providers moving back into prison spaces. And that is good news. That is good news for everybody.
Let's move on to talk about, you were doing volunteer work at the Prison Book Program?
Actually, no. Prison Book Program was entirely volunteer run. There was no paid staff. from when it started in 1972 to 2021. And at that point, I had taken some time off and kind of re-examined my passion for, people in prison and for reform in the prison system. And I was like, I just had decided I wanted to put that at the center of whatever my next move was, professionally, job-wise. And it was at that time that Prison Book Program was, for the first time in its 49-year history at that point, entertaining the idea of hiring paid staff. And they were doing that because it was, for the first time in the organization's history, financially possible to think about that. And so they did. They advertised for a managing director, and I was fortunate enough to sort of be on the market at that time, and fortunate enough to be invited to take the position.
Okay. So did historically the George Floyd case and future cases have an impact on the donations that came into your program?
It did. One outcome of, and it wasn't just George Floyd. I think there was a period there between 2015 and 2020 when the nation's eyes were pointed at the criminal justice system, the prison system, the policing system, in a way that had never happened before in American history, in a critical way, because you had so many killings of unarmed and, if anything, minimally guilty of a small crime, but in most cases innocent. These killings of innocent unarmed Black people. And, we had the Black Lives Matter marches throughout 2020. And one of the outcomes of that sort of period in time is that the fundraising landscape for organizations like mine fundamentally changed. Really, the only change to Prison Book Program's financial needs over the years was to accommodate the increase in postage costs.
Right.
Because if your fundable business is sending packages, that's your main cost, is stamps and postage. But what happened was that several larger bequests and donations started coming in on a regular basis, and fundraising really expanded. There was a social media influencer. It was actually the guy who ran social media for Bernie Sanders' 2 presidential campaigns. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, he started a collective fundraiser on Twitter and Facebook, on social media. He had like millions of followers for 71 organizations, bail funds, Black-led social justice groups, prison-related groups, and we ended up being part of that. And that fund, the monies were divided evenly between all of the groups on there, and it ended up raising quite a lot of money from around the world, really.
Okay.
So the financial picture really changed, and that's when it became possible to bring on 2 staff people. It's just 2, myself and one other person.
And that's Beatrice.
And that's B. Yep, B Masters is our program manager.
So you have 8 board members?
We have 8 board members. Yep. And the board was also kind of a more recent addition. So it had always been governed by what was called the core group, which were volunteers who sort of gave a little extra, who had keys to the space and would organize volunteer sessions. So when we switched to having a paid staff, we're now a more or less conventional nonprofit, in the sense that we have a board of directors who are in charge of the organization's future and its resources. And then we have, a very small paid staff who run operations.
How many volunteers do you have in a given week, let's say, at your facility?
We have 4 volunteer sessions a week. We have
volunteer sessions.
4 a week. So they're Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6:30 to 9, for people who work in the day. And we have 2 afternoons, Wednesdays from 1:30 to 4, and Saturdays from 1 to 4. Saturdays are obviously very popular for people who can't get there on other days.
I'm sorry.
But we have a maximum of 35 people at each session. So we could have as many as 140 people coming to our space. The truth is, a lot of the volunteers come back. They come multiple times a week, or they come every week. So last year in 2022, for example, we ran the numbers and we had 1,104 unique individuals come through our space. About 15% of those 1,100 people come 3 or more times a month. So we call those our regulars.
Okay.
Those are folks. So, but the total number of volunteer sessions, shifts that we have every year is over 200.
Okay.
There are over 200 sessions a year where you can come and volunteer. We
How many Lee Reuben Collinses do you have? That are actually out in the community.
I consider her to be in like the super volunteer category.
Okay.
She's been around for many years and does lots and lots of things for Prison Book Program. I would say at any given time, 15 to 30, sort of in that realm.
So they're sourcing book sales, and what else are they sourcing?
So Lee is one of her many roles is as what we call a book fairy. So we have a team of book fairies. They're, people who know a lot about where to find low cost and free books throughout Greater Boston. And so she has identified the book sales that are just very generous to nonprofits like us. And she has authorization to spend, small amounts of money if needed, but preferably free books. And we have other book fairies as well who go to thrift stores, look online, all kinds of sources. But that's just one of her roles. She also comes to volunteer. She also runs a satellite location out of her garage in her Wellesley home. She has a miniature, we call it the Wellesley Annex. She has a miniature prison book program in her garage.
Goodness.
Where during the pandemic, she just couldn't live without volunteering for PPP. So she filled her garage stall with bookshelves. And we would send letters over to her, request letters over to her, and she would fill them from her garage. She would have friends over to help. And so, that really started during the pandemic. And she wears many other hats for PPP too. She reviews letters from people who have specific legal needs because she's an attorney. She was an attorney for many years. And she does a whole lot of other things for PPP. But there are other Lee Reuben Collinses. They have different roles and stuff, but there are many, many people, like I said, 15 to 30 who probably put in, as much as she does. We're very blessed in that regard. We have wildly devoted volunteers, and it's a wonderful position to be in.
Oh, that is really, really wonderful. So in terms of sourcing the books, what are the most popular?
So this year we're going to send out 17,000 packages of books. And most of those packages will be 3 pounds. So we go by weight, not necessarily by number. But there will be probably well over 60,000 books in those packages.
All over the U.S., right?
All over the U.S. We serve all 50 states as well as Guam and Puerto Rico. You just write us a letter and tell us what kind of book you like to read, and we will fulfill your request. So the reading interests of the incarcerated population, we find mostly mirror the reading interests of the non-incarcerated population. Your genre fiction is very popular. Sci-fi, fantasy, horror, thrillers, spy novels, romance. With the one main difference is that a lot of incarcerated people are looking for far more nonfiction than they are looking for fiction. And the reason for that is there's a lot of unstructured time in prison. And that's what makes doing time so difficult for so many, is that there's so little to do. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people are looking to learn a skill, take up a hobby. We find that really popular pastimes in prisons are learning how to draw, learning another language. So we get a ton of books for how to learn every language you can think of. Someone the other day wanted to learn Danish, so we sent them a Danish-English dictionary. Things about, hobbies, how to crochet, how to, do origami, that sort of thing. Things like health and wellness. One of the very inhumane features of prison is how bad the health care is in there. Mm-hmm. It's basically far below the standard of negligence or malpractice that, you or I might enjoy. And so a lot of people are just looking to keep themselves healthy and well, keep up a fitness regimen. So all of those nonfiction categories become very, very important to people in prison. And I think they have more importance to people in prison than perhaps readers in the free world.
Your media cost must be staggering.
Yeah. So we send all of our packages media mail, which is a much more affordable form of mail than first class mail, which is most of your bills and letters are first class mail. But a 3-pound package at present costs $5.42 to send. Our postage bill this year with the USPS will be about $75,000. It's the second largest item in our budget.
Oh my goodness, that is staggering.
Yeah, and with media mail, when you send as many packages as we do, you're going to get returns. And so every day there's a few returns trickling in. But with media mail, you pay for those returns. You pay the same amount that it costs to send it out.
Goodness.
So if, for example, we get a return, the prison doesn't like one of the books we sent, or we broke one of their rules or whatever, we will pay for that package 3 times. We'll pay for it going out the first time, coming back, and then sending it out again. Because we always try to resend any package that gets returned to us. We try to fix the error, whatever it was, and resend it. So with first class mail, your returns are free. The Postal Service picks up your returns. Not so with media mail, but our return rate is pretty low. It's about 3%.
So organizationally, excuse me, how do you keep up with all the different prisons and all of their stipulations and rules, and you can't do this, and how do you figure all that out? I mean, every time you're sending something out.
We have a very large spreadsheet, a mega spreadsheet called the Restrictions Master List. And it has 51 tabs across the bottom, 1 tab for each state.
Oh my goodness.
And then the other tab, which has Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam, and a row for each facility that we serve in that state. Mm-hmm. And so across the columns would be all the different rules and restrictions. So sometimes they'll be paperback only. They won't take any hardback books. That's one of the most common restrictions. One might be no blank composition book. We do carry blank notebooks, and we get a lot of requests for them. But a lot of times the prisons don't want them getting them from us because they sell them through the little store in the prison called commissary or canteen. Another one is, they don't want any used books, which is really hard for us because 80% of our books are used.
Right.
They want only books in brand new condition. That's a tough one, and more prisons are demanding that books be in brand new condition, and our primary source for those is our wish lists. Mm-hmm. We have 7 of them, 2 online and 5 bricks and mortar bookstores in Greater Boston, and we stock those wish lists with titles that we just always need and never have enough of. Okay. And so, we most of the time we can meet the demand for new books. Sometimes there are specific things they don't want them to have. They don't want them to have any books on learning other languages. Florida's a big problem right now because they won't allow books on learning other languages because they think if the prisoners can speak a language that the guards can't understand, they could communicate in code or whatever. Okay. I mean, the truth is they're just trying to learn another language. Sometimes they'll say no trade skill books, which is also unfortunate because those are hugely popular. Carpentry, plumbing, electrician, these are kinds of jobs you can actually have with a felony record. So people want them for that reason. They're anticipating release. But a lot of times they don't want them to have those books because it is the case that in many prisons, drains and electrical systems can be tampered with and can become security threats or hazards. So there's a whole host of restrictions. Some places are a lot more lenient. Some places are extremely strict. It usually comes down to what security level the prison is. So if it's a high security, medium security, low security. We also find that the federal prison system is a little bit more permissive with what books it'll allow in than many state systems. Women's prisons tend to be a little bit less restrictive on the kinds of books that people can have. But we keep track as well as we can. And we mostly get updates to that prison's rules through returns. We usually place a phone call to the prison. We have a volunteer who's very, very good at that. say, why was this package returned? Oh, we decided, no comic books. Comic books are also very popular, but one place recently decided no comic books. So then we update our giant spreadsheet, and every request that comes in is marked up with the rules at that prison. Right now that system is manual, so it's very time consuming. We're experimenting with a little bit of an automated way to apply a sticker to each request that shows the rules at that prison. But there are so many of them. It would be, impossible if you didn't have a really organized way of keeping all the information about the rules.
Okay. So before we get to showing some of the prison letters, I wanted to ask you, when you're mailing out these books, you're mailing other information as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what those materials are?
So we produce in-house at Prison Book Program 2 resources that are very popular with our readers and shared nationally with other Books to Prisons groups. One is what we have called since the 80s. We've been making it since the 80s. It's called the National Prisoners Resource List. Almost everyone in prison knows about it or has one or knows someone who has one. We call it the NPRL for short. And for many, many years, it was a 6-page listing, just a simple directory of organizations that serve incarcerated people and their families, and a little description of their services and their contact information. That list has grown from 6 pages to 16 pages. We now have a volunteer who serves as the executive editor of the NPRL and is constantly vetting the listings to make sure that they're active, responsive. There's nothing more disappointing than being in prison and writing off to a group you think can help you, and then nothing. So we're actively curating away those listings and adding new ones. So the NPRL is really vital. And we tell our pickers, that's the volunteers who select print resources and books for each reader, we always say throw in the NPRL if they seem new to prison, or if they're just like, I need help, I'm in trouble, I need help. So, because it's great in that regard. It has listings of very helpful organizations. The other one that we print, produce, and hold the copyright to in-house is our legal primer, which is a basic guide to how to represent yourself in the courts. Because once you're in prison, the legal profession has nothing for you. I mean, unless you can afford an attorney, which very few people can. How to file prison grievances. It has the text of the Constitution. It has a legal dictionary. It's just a very helpful, it's longer, it's about 80 pages presently, but it has all the things you need basically to be an effective advocate for yourself and for your rights as an incarcerated person. And we've been making that since 2004.
All right. So let's move on now to have a look at the first letter from a prisoner, and maybe you can help walk us through that first letter.
Sure. So this person is not unusual at all in terms of a book requester. So this person says that they've been receiving books from LPBP, means Lucy Parsons Bookstore. We are in an alliance with the Lucy Parsons Center in Jamaica Plain, and they let us use their bookstore name in our return address. So we have a lot of people who've been receiving books for us for a long time. This gentleman has. He talks about how books are really about survival. He's in secure housing, which is isolation, which is, no movement at all outside the cell. And it can make people suicidal. And he says that the books have really enriched his life, made his time easier. This is a very common refrain. So this person, what books mean to this person, we find that is something we hear a lot from our book recipients.
Thank you for that. Lee, can we bring up the second letter, please?
Yeah, so this person is talking about their lack of education, and like I mentioned earlier, more than 60% of people do not have a high school degree in prison. And so this person is talking about their self-education. And most people do engage in self-education in prison. Looks like he's gotten his HiSET degree, which is a high school equivalency degree, some college credits, and he's gotten accolades from attorneys. So the books that we send are both a mental escape for a lot of our readers, but they're also a vital means of advancing a person's own education. And so those are two themes that we hear a lot. And it says, reading got me here and I will never let it go. We hear that so much that people, I wasn't an avid reader before I came to prison. Again, because there's so little to do. People start reading and they take up reading and it snowballs and it's like, oh, I want to read more and more and more. It's also healthy. It brings your blood pressure down. It calms you. And so we find that a lot of people pick up a reading habit while they're incarcerated. And this guy says, I will never let it go. I know one of our formerly incarcerated volunteers, he wakes up every day and he does 90 minutes of reading. He was incarcerated for a number of years. He picked up that habit and he still does that every single day. So people find that they grow attached to reading in a way that I think is increasingly rare out here in the free world. How many people wake up and read for 90 minutes a day,
Right. We have to also think once these incarcerated people are free, perhaps we could say even for generations throughout their families, that they have the historical knowledge of there was a mistake, there was an imprisonment, but the freedom was the reading and the books. So for their generations, they have that knowledge. Therefore, the ripple effect, right?
Yes. So one of the books from Burlington Public Library's book sale, the Friends of book sale, it could be anywhere in the United States. It could be, we send to Alaska, to Hawaii. It could be in Puerto Rico or Guam. It could be anywhere. And as you can see, the impact of that book could be relief from great suffering. It could be a vital means to a person educating themselves. It has power, real power. All the books that people receive during a term of incarceration they open doors. We talk about them. Every book is a doorway, and it's also appropriate because you open a book like a door.
Oh, absolutely.
And what it does is open doors for people. It allows them to envision themselves in new ways, imagine, dream, hope, and really just make some meaning of their circumstances.
So what's next for the prison book program?
Well, continued growth.
Briefly.
So we just finished our first strategic plan, which the basic theme of is, continue growing. We're hoping to, now that we have paid staff, we can host a lot more volunteers. We're hoping to get to 25,000 packages sent by 2028. That's also going to mean more fundraising. It's also going to mean we're also trying to provide better service for our readers in the sense of responding to everyone who writes to us, even if we can't send books to them. So there's always a few prisons that just simply will not accept books from organizations like ours. They will only allow them if they're from Amazon or one of the big online retailers. And so what we've started doing is if someone writes to us from one of those facilities, we'll send them a postcard that says, unfortunately, your facility isn't accepting books from our program right now. Unfortunately, but if you move, send us another letter and we'll fulfill your request. So we're trying to provide more of a holistic service for readers. We're trying to grow incrementally for the next 5 years in terms of numbers of volunteers, numbers of books sent, numbers of books on site, in-house to choose from. So yeah, that's the path that we're on.
Okay. Dr. Brosman, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
A great honor to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you for gracing us with your presence today here. From all of us at BCAT, we're very, very grateful.
Thank you.
If you're inclined to donate to either the Prison Book Program or the Friends of the Burlington Public Library, stay tuned for that information on your screen. If you care to donate books to the Friends of the Burlington Public Library, you may donate a bag of books per day. Just ask the circulation desk to help orient you. The next book donation day for larger quantities is April 7th, And on that weekend will be the book sale and raffle. Again, I want to thank Dr. Brotzman for spending time with us today, and to thank you at home for tuning in. I hope you've learned as much as I did, and that it'll offer you a new perspective on that one book that you donated, and how far it can reverberate into society and our nation for the greater good, giving hope, reimagining of lives, and changing lives towards second chances. We have to thank the Prison Book Program and its volunteers that make this possible through their very compassionate work. Until we meet again, thank you for spending time with us. From all of us here at BCAT and the Discourse Dive, we wish you all a very happy holiday season. Cheers.